This is Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. I'm Chris Lenois, and today we are speaking with Windham County Senator Jeanette White. She's a member of the Democratic Party seeking re-election on November 8th. Welcome, Jeanette.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yes, indeed. Now, looking back on the legislative website there, you're seeking your 8th term.
Well,
indeed.
I know it's a long time.
Same question I asked David Dean when he was sitting in that chair then, because he, too,
He's
has
been here
served
even
a
longer.
long time.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Thinking back to when you got involved to now, has your reasons for running changed?
No, I think they've probably become more intense. I ran just because well, first of all, there were 2 open seats when I ran, so there was a big scramble among Democrats for those 2 open seats. And I ran because I had been involved on the Putney Select Board, and I've been involved in kind of political kinds of things for most of my life. And I felt that I wanted a chance to serve at the state level. And I was very much encouraged to run by Bob Gannett. I served on a couple boards with him, and he encouraged me to run, and so I did it. Now I see the complexity of what is there and how much work it takes. And I feel more passionate about the issues and the process itself. The process itself it is a wonderful process. When I first got up there, my first term, you don't know anything when you get up there. And even if you think you know everything and you remember it from civics class and all those things, it's really different. And you get in there and you sit down in that seat in the Senate and you go, ooh, what am I doing here? And what did they just do? Why did they do that? Why did they do it that way? Why didn't they do it this way? How do committees work? Where do people have input into the process? All those things. So it took a while to learn. It took a while to get involved in the issues. And as I was telling someone this morning, when I first ran, the issues seemed relatively simple to me, and you could respond, well, I'll do this, or we'll do this. Now I see the complexity of the issues, and everything affects something else, and whatever you do affects something else. And so it's much more difficult, and it becomes harder and harder to explain the longer I'm there, because it gets more complex.
Right,
yeah.
Right. How about from a priority standpoint, in terms of some things that you wanted to see accomplished? Obviously, you have accomplished some of those things over the time that you've been involved. But so do you think that in terms of your priorities, are there things that you continue to advocate for, or things that you have kind of evolved on?
Oh, well, certainly I've learned a lot more about most of the issues. I think that I was very involved. One of the issues that I initially was concerned about was the GMO issue, and not about food labeling necessarily, but about plants and about labeling plants, and also about the liability that non-GMO people are facing from Monsanto because they end up with GMO products in their fields. So I had some bills on that. I've learned a lot more about that, and you realize that even those issues in that issue, those approaches, didn't work. I mean, they passed the Senate, 2 of them passed the House, 1 of them was vetoed, and 1 of them the conference committee couldn't come to a resolution on. But so then we did pass GMO legislation. So I've learned a lot more about that. I think some of the issues that I was really concerned about, that I feel good about what we did, was patient choice at the end of life. That was a big priority of mine, and I think we did a good job with that. And advanced directives is included in there. When I first ran, I didn't realize this, but we were 48th. Vermont in the states was 48th in terms of how easy it was and how much we abided by advanced directives that people had done. It was abysmal, and now we're like 3rd or 4th or something. So working on advanced directives and how we manage that was a huge issue. So healthcare, always been an issue of mine. And
That one's ongoing.
it is ongoing, and each. I mean, you have to be willing to say, oh, it wasn't going to work that way. And I was a huge single payer advocate, and when the governor said it isn't going to work, what I realized is that he was right, because until we contained costs, the costs were going to continue to increase, and it was all going to be on the backs of the taxpayers, all of it. So we had to contain costs first, which is what we're trying to do with this all-payer model. Right. So yeah, I've learned a lot about the process and about the relationships that you need to have up there. While it might sound kind of sketchy to some people, that a lot depends on your relationships. We know that that's true at your workplace. If you manage to tick everybody off at your workplace, you're not going to have a very productive career.
Yeah,
So,
I actually want to ask you a question about
Sure.
working with constituents.
Sure.
One of the other people running in this race, independent David Scholes, had actually told me when we did an interview that one of the reasons he got into the Windham County Senate race was because he felt that you weren't responsive to him at a time when he came up to Montpelier and tried to meet with you. Now, this isn't a one-on-one. This isn't a one-on-one competition, so I'm not asking you to directly respond to that unless you want to. But I do want to ask you about how you feel you're effective in your approach to working with your constituents.
Well, I should say that after 14 years, I'm sure that I've managed to make some people annoyed at me because I didn't meet with them when they wanted to, or I didn't respond to them. And so I might have ignored some emails and some phone calls. I don't know. I try to respond to all of them. When we're in session, we sometimes get up to 150, 200 emails a day, and those little pink slips. So unless...
What are those little pink slips?
Oh, they're the little slips that say,
have
while
a
you were
call.
out of the office,
Okay.
and the pages deliver them to us.
Right.
So if I get 30 pink slips on an issue, and it just says, please vote for, please vote against, I don't call them back unless they say, I'd like to talk to you about this particular bill. Then I call them back. But if it just says vote for or vote against, I don't, because they've already expressed their view. So I'm sure that I've managed to, but I'm willing to meet with anybody, anytime, if I can. I work during the non-legislative session, so I have to arrange it around my work hours. But I try to meet with everybody. I've probably met with 10 or 15 different people over the last 2 weeks, plus groups of people. I go to all the independent and assisted living facilities. I go to schools whenever I'm invited, go to groups, wherever. And I will say that, somebody told me that this morning, that David felt that I hadn't responded to him. And I apologize. I don't remember him wanting to meet down here. So that I might have just spaced it out. It might have gone into my spam. We have a really strong spam filter, as you can probably imagine. And so I apologize for that. I did get a note from him when he came up to the State House, and it said, I will be in the cafeteria from this time to this time, meet with me. It doesn't work that way. I hate to say that, but we have commitments from this time to this time, usually from 8:30 in the morning, although many of us are at the State House at 7:30, but from about 8:30 in the morning until about 5:30 in the afternoon. We have commitments every hour. So just because somebody is there and wants to meet with you doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do it, because we can't. The House is very different in terms of being able to sneak out of committees, because they have 11 people on their committees. So if 2 people are missing for half an hour, you still have 9 people there. We have 5 people on our committees. So if 2 people are missing, that is not fair at all. You've driven all the way up from Brattleboro to testify to our committee, and there's only 3 people sitting there. That's not respectful. So I apologize for that.
All right, let's switch topics
Sure.
anyway to talk about the two people running for governor
Sure.
right now, the two major
Yes.
party candidates. Obviously, as a Democrat, you're endorsing Sue Minter.
I am.
But just curious to know, are there specific things that you feel that she brings to the table that particularly impact things that you want to accomplish?
I think what she brings to the table, first of all, her positions on issues are very much closer to mine than Phil Scott's. I like Phil Scott a lot. I worked with him as a senator, and I've worked with him in his role as lieutenant governor. But I think one of the things that, two reasons that are very strong reasons why I support her. One is because I think that she has the ability to look across government silo lines and look at an issue and say, this issue affects transportation, it affects corrections, and it affects the Department of Environmental Conservation. Let's get all three of those together and work with them. I think she proved that after Irene, and I think she proved that in her role as the Secretary of Transportation.
Yeah. Now, she's drawn scrutiny for suggesting one of the things on the campaign trail in a debate at Tunbridge. She talked about implementing sales taxes on services, the Blue Ribbon Commission suggestion that that's done. Is that something that you would support if she does propose it as governor?
You know, I'd have to see the details. I think that we've evolved from a goods economy to a service economy. And so we have, if we're going to tax, should we be taxing services? I don't know. There are some services that maybe should be taxed. So I'd have to see the details before. I will say that I'm not outrightly opposed to it. So I would. But let me tell you the other reason why I think Sue deserves our support is I think that the people she would appoint, the governor's role is more important than just the governor, him or herself. It's in the people that are appointed. So you have the Secretary of Transportation, you have Agency of Natural Resources, you have all of those positions to appoint. And that is where a lot of the changes come from, those positions. And I think she would appoint people who are much more in line with my philosophy than what Phil Scott would do.
Yeah. Well, now you saw the VPR poll, I'm sure, that came out a couple days ago before taping this, and it's pretty neck and neck between the two.
Yeah.
Phil Scott has a more than fair chance, obviously, of being the next governor, and working with him, one of his proposals is to tie budget growth to economic growth in the state. He hasn't gotten specific on cuts or efficiencies, as he likes to call them, but I'm wondering, are there non-starters for you? If he were to propose a budget and certain programs were to be cut or scaled back, are there things that you would say absolutely not to?
Again, I'd have to look at the details. I'm not sure. I am part of what's called the Government Accountability Committee, which is not a standing committee in the Senate. And one of the things that we're looking at is how are we, the outcomes that we've defined, which nobody can argue with, like let's have a prosperous economy. So the indicators that we use to measure those, that's where you get into the differences of opinion. So there are probably programs out there that could be cut because they're not meeting the outcomes. They're not, the example that's used is if you have a program that says we're going to cut teenage pregnancies, and you fund them, and then they come in next year and say, well, we got $100 last year and we served 100 people. We're going to serve 150 people this year, so we need $150. You say, did you cut teenage pregnancies? No, but we did a lot of other really good things. People's self-worth was increased and all that kind of stuff. And you say, your goal was to cut teenage pregnancies. Maybe we shouldn't be funding you. So I think that but it has to be looked at in terms of the objectives and the outcomes and how we're getting there. And I don't believe in across the board cuts. I think that's a real mistake. So I would, any cuts, so there might be some programs. I could say I wouldn't like to cut anything that has to do with mental health, for example. But I can't say that for sure either, because there may be programs within the mental health field that don't work. So let's look at other programs. Do they work better? So.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk a little about your work in government operations,
Sure.
chairing that committee in the Senate. Something that was passed in the Senate, but a little bit too late in the session for the House to take up was this State Ethics Commission.
Yep.
Right after that piece of legislation was kind of left to linger, Secretary of State Jim Kondos was critical of it for some of the holes in it, saying it doesn't cover municipal officials.
Yep.
Some people outside of government, like Paul Burns of VPIRG, talked about how it didn't really address pay for play.
Yep.
Are you looking at the fact that it didn't pass the House as an opportunity to revisit this, and should it be revisited?
Oh, sure, it should be, and it definitely will be.
Okay.
There will be, it'll be a new bill. It won't be the same one that we passed. And it did not address municipalities. And what we did instead was we asked the Vermont League of Cities and Towns to find out, they have a model ethics platform, or they send it out to towns. So we asked them to do a survey. How many of your towns have adopted this model policy? And if most of them have, and most of them are using that policy, then maybe we don't need to apply a state ethics commission to that. And it's one of those things that gets more complicated than it seems. First of all, the Constitution, and most states don't have this in their Constitution. The Constitution says that the Senate and the House are responsible for their own members. So does that mean that an outside ethics commission can have hearings against a potential ethics violation of a senator?
Perhaps it would need an amendment then to the Constitution.
Well, and that takes 8 years.
Sure,
or
right.
4 years
an
or
extra
something.
obstacle, right.
Right. So, I mean, there are ways of doing it, and we tried to address all of those. I've already talked to, assuming I'm there again, and assuming I chair government operations, and none of it is a given. So I've already talked. Do you know who Bill Schubert is? He's a commentator.
Yes, I do actually. Yeah.
I have had many conversations with him about Ethics Commission, and he's going to come in and help us try and get it right. I think he's a great resource. The way the original bill was proposed, it would have cost about $750,000 to administer. I don't think
that would have full-time people dedicated to as resources to it. You don't think that's necessary?
I think there are ways of doing it without spending that kind of money, and we already have campaign finance. That's handled by the Attorney General's offices. We have, both House and Senate have sexual harassment policies and committees, and we do have policies around recusing yourself if there seems to be a conflict of interest. And the way conflict of interest is defined in Mason's, we use Mason's, not Robert's Rules of Order, we use Mason's Rules of Order. So the way a conflict is defined is if you stand to gain more than anybody else in your class. So if you're a retired teacher, and we set the contributions for retirees, for people to pay into the retirement system. If you're a retired teacher, should you vote on that? Well, you're not going to benefit any more than the other 20,000 retired teachers in the state.
I want to go back to, you were talking a little bit about healthcare earlier as a priority for you throughout the time you've been in the Senate. Right now, Governor Shumlin looking at an all-payer model. Yep. We'll see how that goes forward. But both Phil Scott and Sue Minter have said that switching to the federal exchange is something that's on the table for them if they become governor, should they not be able to fix Vermont Health Connect. How do you feel about something like that?
Well, again, I'd like to see the details. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it would. We've invested a lot of money up to this point. I believe that it's working better than it has worked. And I think that people don't understand that it's a very, very complicated system. And some of the things that we had in there are not in the federal system. So if we went to the federal system, we would lose a lot of that, and we'd have to set up a parallel system to deal with those things. Whether that's cost efficient or not, I can't say until I see the numbers. I personally think that it can be fixed, and that I think that they've spent a lot of time, and it was not buy this off the shelf software system. It had to be completely developed, and
it's more about the software for you than the actual implementation of the healthcare policies, the health exchange.
Oh, I think the healthcare exchange has nothing to do with healthcare policies.
Right.
And in fact,
Right.
if we had single-payer system, we wouldn't even have a health exchange. As long as we have private insurers, we have this, and this is, but it has nothing to do with health outcomes or health itself.
Yeah. Okay. So on the similar kind of vein of something that exists can be fixed or something that needs to be overhauled. District unification, Act 46. I have yet to meet a lawmaker who thinks it was perfect.
It was not perfect.
And I know you're going to say
most things
that,
aren't perfect.
But where do you stand on that? I mean, some people have said we need to go right back to the beginning and readdress this, or do you think it's something that can be refined from the point that we're at now?
Well, we are at this point. Mm-hmm. So whatever you do to it, whether you make broad changes, completely overhaul it, or just make tweaks, you're making changes to what exists right now.
Okay. So broad changes or tweaks?
Broad changes or tweaks. I think that there need to be. I think that one of the problems with Act 46 was not the legislation itself, but the way the Agency of Education has interpreted it. I think that I have seen some things that the alternative, for example, that when we put that in there, I'm not on the Education Committee, so I can't take any credit for what was in there or what wasn't in there. I can take the blame because I voted for it, but I think that we were convinced, most of us were, that ability to say we are already meeting the goals of Act 46, so we are applying for this alternative system. It seemed pretty straightforward to us. The Agency of Education has not interpreted it that way. So I think there are some things that we need to do clarification of, and then I think my understanding is that there are right now 55 towns that have successfully complied with it and are relatively happy with it. So we should look at what they did, why they're happy with it, why it seemed to work for them, and why it hasn't worked for other people, and then say, where do we need to make the changes? But education is one of the most complicated issues, I believe, that we address.
Yeah, and heated.
And part of it is because of the way we have we have 260 units of educational governance in a state with 620,000 people and 180,000 students?
Right.
So we have one governance unit for every couple thousand students. And they're all different employers, and they all have different contracts, and I don't know that works. Yeah. So I don't think that what we're doing now works, but that's one of the things that makes it so complicated, because there are so many governance units. Now, Montpelier dictates more to those governance units than they themselves have the authority to do. So I don't know how you do it. And since we've lived here, I think that there have been 8 or 10 different funding formulas, and somebody hates all of them.
Right.
So we'll never make everybody happy. And what we have to do is we have to look at what is the best for the kids.
Right.
How do we provide the best education?
Well, let me talk about another issue that doesn't make, or somebody's always going to be left unhappy, and that has to do with renewable energy siting. And obviously here in Windham County,
Yeah.
there are some of your constituents up in the Windham-Grafton area who right now are embroiled in a battle about that. There was a special session after the governor's veto to fix it at the end of last year. Are you satisfied with that fix?
Well, I think that it did fix it. It did give more input from the local communities. I personally don't think that a town should have a veto power. I don't. I think that there should be input, and that the town plans should be given deference. But if everybody just said no, that would leave us not able to address our problems.
So does wind have a role to play, in your opinion, in renewable energy portfolio?
I believe it does. I think it does. And I realize that neither wind nor solar are base energy, which is why we love fossil fuels so much, right? Because you can fire them up, and then you can fire them down, and then you can fire them up. You can't do that with the sun and the wind. But so we have to figure out ways of storage, and so that we can have that base power. But yes, I think wind has a place to in the whole delivery system. And I know I was accused once of thinking that all of our ridge lines should be developed. I don't think that. I think they're probably, if you look at it, there are probably only 10 or so places in Vermont that are even capable of doing it, that are even appropriate. So let's look at those, and then let's figure out whether it's a good thing to do there or not.
Yeah. One last question here before we get to the end. It has to do with a piece of legislation. It goes fast, doesn't it?
I can talk forever. You know that.
Well, you brought up the bill for legalizing marijuana last year.
I did.
I already can tell you're disappointed that it didn't pass, and I think you've already told me you're not going to reintroduce it.
You know, first of all, if Phil Scott is governor, what's the point? He's going to veto it, and there wouldn't be enough to override a veto. Secondly, only 24 people in the House voted for it out of 150 people. There's not going to be that big a turnover. So if the House isn't going to do it again this year, what's the point?
Yeah.
I would love to do it, but I would love to get it passed.
Right. So if somebody else brought it up, it would still be something you would support, or would that depend on what it looked like? I mean, the bill was a very different bill at the end than it was when you introduced it.
That's usually what happens to bills, and that's what I love about this process, is that you look at all the issues and you look at all the different opinions on how this should be solved, and then you put them together. So when we designed the bill, when Joe Benning and I wrote the bill, it was our vision. But now we had all this input from all these other people, so of course it changed. I would support it. I don't know that I would fight really hard for it like I did last year because of the potential veto by the governor, and because I don't think the House will do it again this year. Why would they have changed their mind?
Right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Did want to give you a few seconds here to address the voters directly.
Okay, well, I hope you'll consider voting for me. Remember, you have 2 votes, and I hope you'll consider voting for me. I also hope you'll consider voting for Becca. I think we've created a good team, and we work together very well. And experience does count, relationships do count up there, and I believe that I have the experience to serve you well, and I hope you'll vote for me.
Jeanette White,
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
And thank you for watching this edition of Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. You can watch this episode as well as all of them on BrattleboroTV.org. Also want to remind everybody that Election Day is November 8th, but early voting is available now. Go to your town clerk's office and get a ballot. Thank you.